big masked figure. They had horns. This is where my body gravitated.
Oh, this chick literally goes through the car as we drive through, like spiritually.
That man sitting on the bed the night before.
The blue light flashed in front of our eyes.
Take a walk with me to the dark side, where the spirits are archived on the bar side. Shadows with dark eyes and creatures that tell lies.
And there was a rocking chair. And it would rock by itself.
It's got some funky shit going on in it.
Very scary. It felt like someone was watching us the entire time we were walking. I hear this low pitch.
What's up, everybody? Not sure what's going on, but I couldn't hear your audio.
Oh, there it is. I forgot to
You might
unmute
have been
myself.
muted.
So, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Ghosts. I'm your host, Sunray. Blah, blah, blah. You missed my whole spiel, but welcome, Rob. He's going to share his experiences about West Virginia Penitentiary.
Yeah, what's up, everybody? You probably have seen me on MadWack's channel once before, so figured I'd slide through, show some love to this channel. Can never show too much love, but let's go ahead and get into it. We got some photos that I took during my tour of Moundsville State Penitentiary. It was basically the former state penitentiary of West Virginia up until they closed it, and then they moved it to another part of the state and made it co-ed. The Moundsville State Penitentiary, before they closed it, did become co-ed for a little bit, but they still had to separate the males and females from one another for whatever obvious reasons. I'm not sure why they did that, but it probably was a state law, but they did that. The photo that's on the screen, as you can see, they established it in 1866. Prison for men and women convicted of felonies, so like murders, the really bad stuff that you could think of. So basically, like, they also had the death penalty up until it was abolished in whatever year they abolished it. I want to say it was 1965.
Yeah, 1965.
So their main methods of execution of the inmates were hangings and also electric chair. So they did both of those. They didn't do lethal injection or firing squad.
Yeah, I actually did get to see the photos that you sent to me of those. And I wasn't too sure if YouTube would let me air them. So here's an amazing photo of the building. But the photos that he sent me, they're pretty cool. You actually get to still see the electric chair and the noose.
Right. And we can touch on those. Like, we could probably talk about them, but YouTube's rules, they're very, I would say, family friendly, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Even though there's like no blood or anything on the noose, the fact of a noose just being there, it's going to offend somebody.
Oh yeah.
Regardless.
And my channel is still so small. I don't want to risk offending anybody or violating any standards. So, but if you want to check those out, you probably can Google them or go take a tour yourself. Do you want to touch a little
Right.
bit on some of those photos and what you learned?
Yeah, so basically, like there's even YouTube channels that people have gone through and done the same tour that I did. Mine was a little bit different because the day that I toured, it was in the middle of the summer. They also use the penitentiary facility, especially the yard area, for like law enforcement and fire department training. So on this particular day, they had that going on. They also use it as a educational tool for children. So they also had a busload of children there as well, even though it was in the middle of the summer. So they kind of cut out some areas of the tour just to make it more friendly for the children, which was okay, but it was still cool and really educational. I myself, while I was there, didn't experience any like paranormal activity, but you could definitely still feel the energy there. Like something is there. And the reason why I believe that something is there is because across the street from this facility is the absolute hugest burial mound I have ever seen. And you can tell it's a burial mound because of the way it's like made and the way it's structured. And it's actually a historical landmark for the state of West Virginia. And apparently, it is exactly that. It's a burial mound, and it's the world's largest Indian burial mound. So the hearsay is, and the legend of it, here in the left-hand corner of the photo that Sunray is showing, that's the burial mound I'm talking about. So you can see there on the Google Map shot, it does show the Grave Creek Mound Historical Site, and then it does say Burial Mound and Museum. So the West Virginia Penitentiary that's across the street, as you can see, that is widely believed as to why this structure is so haunted, because they believe it is built on Indian burial ground.
That is really cool, and I totally love that photo because they say like with Native Americans and stuff, when you enter burial grounds, you're in the sacred land, you're supposed to walk in clockwise direction. And if you look at that mound, I'll show it again. If you look at that mound, there is a walkway that goes clockwise to the top.
Yep.
That is really cool. And
Yeah, I didn't
exactly
visit that when
right.
I was there, but if I ever go back, I'm absolutely going to go visit it
Yeah,
because stuff like that just fascinates me.
absolutely. That is really fascinating. So I do have a couple of other photos pulled up that I was really curious about. I hope this one will come. Yeah, this one right here. What is
Yeah,
this
so
and what kind of connection does it have to the penitentiary?
all right, so basically what this is at the very like start of the tour. This is one of the first 2 or 3 rooms that they actually take you through. So what this is they actually had these statues in a historical museum, and the museum was actually going to basically destroy these. So what had happened was the penitentiary, they were like, hey, this is a piece of history in West Virginia. So let's go ahead and take this and put it in our exhibit at the prison so that we can go over it. So basically, the reason why it's here is because, you're in a penitentiary, you have inmates that were there and being housed, and they basically use it as an educational tool because if you notice the one statue, it looks like his face is like basically defaced.
Mm-hmm.
That's because it is. Some people basically found a way to get into the prison, and they defaced that statue. So they use this as an educational tool to basically teach people, don't deface historical property and things of that nature. I don't think this actually has anything to do with like paranormal hauntings or things of that nature. It was just something that I found interesting, so I took a picture of it.
It is
And
really interesting.
this was the PG version because that Indian woman that's sitting there,
Mm-hmm.
she's practically buck naked, so
All
that wouldn't have
right.
been good for YouTube.
Probably the reason why they angled her the exact direction too, so that like the little kids on the tour don't have to see her front side.
Oh no, they can see the front side because if they go along the right side of the photo, that's
Mm-hmm.
open too, so they can all see it.
Oh, okay. But that is really a good little area to have. Like I love that it's teaching people like why you shouldn't deface historical things, like that's something that's teaching us something, and it kind of like makes me feel a little bit of a connection to the burial ground across the street.
Yeah, and I think that's why they added it in here too, because they know that burial mound is across the street, and they even talk about that during the tour. They mentioned in this very room where this photo was taken, actually, they said, as you came in, you may have saw that giant mound across the street. That is an Indian burial ground, and it is the largest Indian burial mound on the face of Earth.
Wow. That is crazy. I love that. It's like they're connecting it without connecting it.
Right.
I love that. All right, so I have this other scene which looks like a billboard, and I'm curious as to like prison or university. Like, was there a transition at some point from a prison to a university?
Yeah, so at one point they actually had, and we'll touch on this quite a few times during the episode, they actually did have a prison riot where the inmates, for very numerous days, I want to say it was probably closer to a month and a half, something like that, they actually took possession of the prison. They were holding guards hostage, they were holding uh, the warden and things of that nature hostage. And then it became a huge thing where they had to involve the state government. They brought in negotiators and things of that nature. One of the things that they negotiated was, we want to get an education while we're in here. Like, we may never get out of here, but we would feel better about ourselves if we had some sort of education. So that was one of the demands that they met during the um, negotiation process. There was also, at this point of time at the prison, they didn't have air conditioning in there, so it was naturally cooled. And I don't know if you've ever been to West Virginia or not, but one of the things about West Virginia, their winters are very, very, very harsh. Like, we're talking very deep freezes. We're talking a lot of snow. Um, we're not talking like on the West Coast where we get like 6, 7 inches of snow and we're like, oh, we have to close down the whole state.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, West Virginia is like that. They do have mountains, they can handle it, but they get like 4, maybe 5 inches of snow, and they call a snow day for the kids. Like, they don't play around on the East Coast when it comes to that.
Wow.
West Coast, we're just like, we'll roll the plows, we'll salt the roads, and it's a normal day.
Even if it's up to my waist, I still got to go to work.
Right, which is where you get that whole, back in my day, I walked up and down the hill 6 miles a day barefoot to go to school. You
Other
kids
than
don't
being
know anything.
barefoot, I actually had to do that. Walk uphill in the snow to school every morning.
Yeah, it doesn't sound fun. The closest I got to it was, we had a blizzard in the state I live in, and I had to walk to school, and it wasn't very far, and it wasn't uphill at all anyway. But the sheer amount of snow we had, I I'm pretty sure I got some sort of frostbite on my feet walking to school. I mean, it was bad. I wasn't barefoot or anything, but it was still cold enough that you could feel it through your shoes.
Mhm. Oh yeah. I made that mistake in Kansas one time. Their temperatures dropped to like the negatives, and I walked to work in one layer. By the time I got there, my legs and my skin was so chapped. Oh man, I didn't walk after that.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you one bit there.
So, I want to ask a little bit about this riot because I think I might know because I've seen a lot of stuff on this place, but I want to make sure I don't want to say something that actually was at a different penitentiary. So, do you know why they had the riot to begin with, other than the cold temperature and the education?
So there was a few things. This structure, you can tell just by looking at it. I mean, it's a lot older now, but it always wasn't very well kept. The state of West Virginia didn't really pump a whole lot of money into upkeep when it came to their prisons back then. So basically, one of the things what the inmates would do is there's a hallway during the tour that you go. I think they bring you into the kitchen area. They go in, tell you about that. So the kitchen was actually part of the negotiations for them to stop the riot. They wanted an all new state of the art air conditioned kitchen area for the inmates. And then, as part of the university thing, they actually did have inmates that took culinary classes so that they could actually cook for the inmates while they were there. And that was part of it. Another thing was they actually had rat infestations. So they were having rats run rampant. They were going in and out of the cells. They were biting and tearing up like the beds and things in the cells. They were basically doing what rats do,
Hmm.
relieving themselves wherever they wanted to. And, it was just bad. So it gets to that point, and uh, they either have to condemn the prison to make it unlivable by whatever standards, even though they're inmates. But back then, they treated inmates a lot worse than they do now.
Hmm.
Like, I know people that are either currently incarcerated or have been incarcerated in the last 10 years. And they're like, you know what? You actually might get treated better in jail sometimes than you do outside of jail. And
Yeah.
it's it's just funny how things have changed when it comes to that. But basically, what they would do is on the other side of the kitchen, you come out and you're in this other hallway, and this is like literally on the back side of the prison, right before you get to the yard area. And what they have is they have windows there. So they stop you as part of the tour, and you're thinking, what do windows have to do with this? But what they go into is, keep in mind the harsh winter that I just brought up earlier. So the inmates would actually find something to throw through those windows. And they would do that to get air conditioning during the summer months. Because on the flip side of West Virginia, you have tremendous humidity. So anybody who's ever dealt with humidity knows that it makes summer weather 10 times worse.
Hmm.
So you're in an unconditioned prison. So they're throwing rocks and stuff through these windows to get air. And the warden kept telling them, you keep knocking the windows out, I'm not going to replace them when the wintertime comes. And the inmates are like, oh, we're going to call your bluff. You're not going to do that. The warden was serious. He did not fix those windows that winter, and people died of hypothermia as a result.
Wow. That is tragic, and that is definitely some of the things I remember being told and learning about the conditions that they were in. Like, yeah, they're prisoners, but they're still human beings. They're still
Right.
living people, and have living conditions for them. I had heard their food was absolutely terrible,
Horrible.
almost unedible. The
And
treatment that they got by the
right.
guards and the officers and stuff was terrible. Like, it was just an awful situation, and they almost had to do that riot just so that they could survive.
hmm It was absolutely necessary. That riot had to take place so that the conditions would get better. And they did, and they got better up until the point when they did close it, which I believe they closed it in 2005 or 96 or something like that. And then that's when they built the new prison and extradited all the inmates over there.
Wow. Is there anything else you want to touch on this topic? Because I have one more photo I really want to ask you about, and then it's all yours.
No, we can move on, and then we can touch on some of the other ones we don't necessarily have photos of, but we can talk about it because that's where a lot of the real paranormal happenings start coming in as part of the tour goes and over the stories of this place, because it is one of the most haunted places in all of America, not just West Virginia.
You know, it's the history parts of it that I am very fascinated about. I mean, you'd be surprised that I failed history in school growing up, but now as an adult, I just can't get enough of the history. And when I watch paranormal shows, that tour that talks about the history of the place is the part that I am glued to the TV to. The investigation parts, I'm like, oh, this is, this is fun. I love that the validation that they get and everything, but the history behind all of it is really what gives it the scene.
Right. Yeah. I've always had a history interest going through school. I may not have always paid attention, but that might have been more on the teacher's fault, not mine. Um, the one thing that I was always really interested in was, ironically enough, the wars. Like, I don't know why, but something about wars I've always been fascinated by. Like, why did they start? Why did they go as long as they did? Like, who started what to put this whole thing into motion? It's like, why do people do what it is they do for wars to start? And
Mhm.
it's just stuff like that has always interested me. And up until that point of my history class, I didn't really care. It's like, oh, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, that's cool, but it's not really all that fascinating to me. I mean, it's important to know that information, but like, just tell me why somebody's bombing somebody else, or tell me why two nations are at war, and like, what are their grievances with each other, and like, let's figure this out.
Mhm.
And like the history of why things are the way they are. Like, why is this building haunted? Like,
Mhm.
it's an ordinary building. Like, why is something still staying at this building when they're not even physically here anymore? So it's stuff
Right.
like that that it just really makes me think, and it's like, what's going on?
Mhm. You definitely like to know the whole thing, kind of like war. Like, okay, great, I know it happened, but explain it to me. Tell me why and how. Same thing with the hauntings, what kind of tragedy or something, what kind of event happened that impacted this place so much that there are still spirits from over 200 years ago still in this building.
Right. Like, why can't they leave? Why are they trapped? Like,
Hmm.
what can we do to help them pass on and go to where they had initially wanted to go in the first place?
Now, you see, if we were to help all of those spirits pass on, we wouldn't have any haunted places.
Right.
So, ghost hunters, when you're going to ghost hunt these famous places, don't be trying to cross everybody over because we need an attraction to still go to.
Yeah. And then at the same time, be careful, because some of them don't want to leave, even if you
Yeah.
do want to help them. And then that's how you get possessed.
Hmm. Well, not only that, but I've learned through my personal experiences with spirits and hearing other experiences is sometimes they don't want to leave. That is their heaven,
Hmm.
or that is the place that they felt most comfortable at. Why
Oh,
would
yeah.
you want to go somewhere that you have no idea even exists if you were perfectly happy right where you are?
Oh, yeah.
So like a lot of spirits just they like being there. They know they can freely come and go, but they choose to be there.
Yep. Exactly. And then, on the flip side, there's something that happened to them, and
Hmm.
they're trapped, and they're like, we can't leave until this is solved, and you guys know what happened to me, then I'll pass, so go on.
Yeah.
So
Closure. Yeah. All right, so this is the next photo that I want to know. You said there was a pretty good story behind this.
All right, yeah. So where this photo was actually taken, this was where they used to have the family visits with the inmates whenever the inmates would have visitors. So in the corner of this room, which I don't have a picture of, you got to remember this is still a state prison. These are our felons that we are dealing with. So they're not going to have, children and women and family members here and not have some sort of protection. So in the corner of the room, there is actually a cage where the guards would come in and they would be watching over them, similar like they would do if they were in the yard. And back then, in the 1920s and 30s, their weapon of choice to protect was shotguns. So, the kids would walk into this room, and before these pictures were actually painted, which they were done by inmates, actually, um, you can imagine being a little kid and you don't understand why there's some scary looking guy in a uniform looking at your family member, looking like if he has to, he would do harm to him. So, to put the kids' minds at ease, the inmates took it upon themselves to paint these Ninja Turtles on the wall to put their minds at ease so that they didn't pay more attention to the guards that were standing vigil over the room. And it seemed to have worked. Now, for the Ninja Turtle buffs out there, what is wrong with Raphael's belt?
I can't see it good enough on my little screen. Hopefully the viewers can see it.
So there's a circle with an L in it and it's painted blue.
Oh.
That's not Raphael or Leon.
Mm,
That's Raphael, not Leonardo.
now that's funny. That is funny. But good job considering.
Yeah. So, and then like you can see off to the right there, that little blue guy with a bow staff.
Mhm.
That's actually supposed to be their depiction of Shredder.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know if I have that one saved. Did you send that one to me?
I don't think I took a picture of Shredder.
Okay. Let's say if I missed that one, I can edit it in. But yeah, I like that, and I'm glad that the inmates were like, we need to make these kids and these family members feel a little more comfortable because it is kind of crazy in here, and they went and painted that. That's pretty neat, and kind of just shows that even though you fuck up in life, you're still human.
Right? I mean, you messed your life up doesn't mean you need to mess the little kids' lives up by traumatizing them half to death.
Yeah, and visitations for children they can be pretty traumatic just because of the facility and the
Oh yeah,
guns and the officers and whatnot. So I'm sure that
especially with
helped a
the age of
lot.
the children because they go there, they see their dad if that's who's in prison, and they're like, "Why isn't dad coming home with us?" Like they don't understand.
Exactly. All right, so I have one more photo saved, which is the one that is on your shirt. Do you want to talk about that yet, or the floor is all yours?
So we'll go ahead and we'll go over some other stuff real quick before we lead to that one, just because the photo that we are going to talk about, anybody who's into the paranormal has probably seen this photo once or hundreds or thousands of times because it is a very famous photo. Um, Anybody who knows the lore of the building that we're talking about will know exactly what photo it is without seeing it, hands down. And I'm sure the comments when this video does go live, it's gonna be, yeah, we know that photo. That photo's crazy. It's awesome. And then they'll share their takes of it and like things that they may know. And that's really honestly what I'm hoping is going to happen with this video. That
I would
there's going to
love
be a
that.
huge conversation. Um, so we'll get it there, whatever it takes. But to go and touch up on it, the backside of the prison, which I do believe I sent you a photo of that.
I might actually have it right here. Yep, right there.
Yeah, so this photo right here is actually the backside of the prison facing the yard. So you'll notice right there in the middle, there's that little kind of like patio / balcony there. That is actually where a guard would be positioned watching over the yard in case, like, a huge fight happened or anything of that nature. And then they would actually have guards walking up along the top right there not in the middle, like very, very top, but we're like talking the sides of the building. They would have guards there. Plus, they would have guard towers outside of the yard, typical yard type stuff when you're at a prison. But the reason why I brought this one up was back in the day, now the warden doesn't actually live at prisons. They changed the laws so that wardens would not live there with the inmates. In this case, back then when this prison was here, they actually did have a living quarters for the warden and their family. So the warden would actually live on premise with the inmates, and he would actually take an inmate that he trusted the most, and they would have them watch their kids when they would go and do whatever they needed to outside of the prison.
Wow,
So
free
you would
babysitter.
imagine, yeah, they would have inmates babysit their kids. Like, if you fast forward it to today, that would not fly at all.
The times were definitely different back then. That is crazy.
But the other thing about that is that second floor where you could see the windows were open, that was actually the whole floor was where the warden would live.
The floor
So
right above the little
right
patio
above
area?
that patio area thing
Okay.
that's in the middle. So that would actually be where the warden and his family would stay. And in there is a wall where an inmate, and they think it was the guy that the warden most trusted, he actually painted a depiction of a pentagram on that wall. They didn't actually show us this during our tour because, again, we had kids with us and there were certain areas of the prison being locked down for maintenance needs or etc. But they did say that they can get up there and they have seen this pentagram. Well, anybody that knows what that's going to do, you know exactly why this is probably most likely the most haunted prison ever. Prisons are usually always haunted because of what happens in them, either it be between the inmates or everything else that happens. But when you're drawing pentagrams on walls, you're asking for something more than what you really need.
I have a crazy thing that I just learned about pentagrams. Um, so typically associate the pentagram with Satan, demonic entities, whatnot,
Right,
working with the darkness and stuff. Um, in witchcraft, a pentagram is actually a symbol of protection. It is how we
right,
protect ourselves from negative energies and entities and people coming against us. And I actually just learned from an actual demonologist that the pentagram isn't even in the demonologist books. It doesn't exist. It has no meaning. So it's actually a symbol of protection that people have flipped and put intentions of negativity into. So depending on who is using it and how they're using it, it's mostly the intention set behind it on what it's going to do. So somebody drawing the pentagram in that building, having that hostile, negative, rageful kind of intentions, like I want to cause harm with this, that's what it's
right,
going to do.
right. And glad you brought that up because one of my favorite movies when it comes to like Halloween time is Sleepy Hollow with Johnny Depp and Christina Ricci. And there's that scene where he pulls his bed out and that giant tarantula comes running out underneath his bed. And then there's what looks to be a pentagram in chalk on his floor.
Mhm.
And he's like, oh, she means to do me harm. I can't trust her. And then he goes through her book and sees like for protection of a loved one. And it's the same thing that he saw on the floor.
Yep.
And then he's like, oh, I got to go back and save her. She's in danger.
I love that movie. Not very many people remember that movie for some reason. There's only like a specific kind of people that remember Sleepy Hollow.
Yeah, and I love that movie. I still watch it even when it's not Halloween.
It's
I'll
a good
probably go
one.
watch it when I'm done with this.
I know, now that you said that, I'm gonna go see if I can find it on any of my streaming apps.
Right? I think it might be on Netflix.
Oh,
Don't quote me
nice.
on that though. But yeah, and then on the backside of that, during our tour that we were at, they were doing like training in the yard. So there's another area that I would love to go back and do another tour, and hopefully they take us through there. It's called the Candy Shack. So you would think, with the name like the Candy Shack, that it's, all unicorns and lovey-dovey stuff and rainbows, and no, not even close. So usually when you go out and you have what's known as R&R when you're in prison, you are always watched by a guard in case like a fight breaks out or they have to lock down the prison due to a fight or somebody doing something they shouldn't that warrants them doing a lockdown. Well, back in those days, they actually did have areas where there were no guards present at all, and the Candy Shack is one of those areas. Um, I'm not going to go into what happened down there just because of YouTube terms of service, but
If you know, you know.
there,
Use your imagination.
yeah, there are some paranormal happenings that happen down there, and it's because of what happened to one of the inmates that was down there. That's all I'm going to go into, because if I go any further than that, YouTube's going to be like, nope, nope, we don't like it. Nope, nope, get rid of it. Nope.
Exactly. You can probably touch on it a little bit because I actually I watched Selena Spooky Boo. Have you ever heard of her?
I think I've heard of her from your
She's
other videos.
she's one of my favorite YouTubers, but she has done a few paranormal stuff with her friends, and they went here and they were in the basement, and she has her best friend is a gay boy.
She was
And
probably actually in the Sugar Shack.
yeah, and exactly, and this is the scene I'm going to talk to you about. He did something to trigger a
Ugh.
spirit. He got in the
That was
stance.
their first mistake.
Yeah, he got in the stance on all fours, okay, and he actually froze. He couldn't move. He said it felt like something literally paralyzed him, and they were like, "Taylor, are you okay? Are you okay? Or like, what's going on?" And he just wasn't speaking, and he was just like, in the moment, like, what the hell is happening to me?
Mm-hmm.
And it really freaked him out. So the trigger did work, but if you want to know more about that, check out Selena's Booby Boo or whoever's been there, and they can go into a little bit more detail.
Yeah, so basically what had happened to this inmate, word got around to the other inmates that he was a snitch, which anybody who knows, you don't snitch on any of your, prison mates. You just don't. That's going to put a target on your back that you don't want. So basically, a lot of these inmates cornered him. They had their prison made artifacts, is what I will call them, and they used them on this individual. Not only did they stop after they did what they did to him, they basically continued to do other things to this individual. And that's only one of a few murders that I know of happened in this particular sugar shack, and it's not very well lit either. So unless the inmates were tipped off that one of these individuals were down there, who knows how long it could have been before they found these individuals, because the guards were never down there in the first place. So it's really sad and unfortunate that things like that happened, but it does give us something to talk about. So
Most definitely. And I think it's like these really terrible and bad things had to happen so that there could be room to grow. There could be ways to improve. Jails aren't like that anymore. I mean, there is still pretty some messed up stuff that happens in prisons and whatnot, but they don't have that kind of areas anymore to just hide people in and do those terrible, awful things in. So
right.
the unfortunate happened, but it opened eyes for people and made new
And things
regulations.
changed for the better as a result.
Because sadly, us humans are disgusting creatures. We will do god awful things to people.
And unfortunately, it's hardwired in humans' DNA, and that's partially like the whole thing where I said wars are fascinating to me. There's been wars going back to like BC times, like before all that, and it's like it's just in our nature to do that to each other, and it's sad. Like we need to change that. We need to start caring about each other more. We need to start loving one another. And it's like, hey, you know what, you having a bad day, like, hey, hit me, like, freaking hit me with it, let me know what's going on, let's see if I can help you with it or something like that. And people just don't do it. It's sad. Like, it
Not enough,
really is
definitely.
sad. But one of the other things I wanted to touch on, kind of roundaboutly, um, like we said at the beginning of the show, I did send in a photo of the noose, which we will not show because of YouTube's rules. But the reason why I had sent that was at the back of this area, they actually used to do public executions at this penitentiary, like in the 20s and 30s. Well, there was one inmate that he was sentenced to death, and he um, did meet his demise at this prison, and it was due to the execution. The warden, like the week before they would actually do a public hanging, they would actually put an ad in the newspaper telling people, hey, come have a picnic, come watch this, come watch us execute this inmate. Well, this particular inmate was rather heavy set. He was rather tall, and they would make the noose fresh every time. So they would use new materials. Well, what had happened was this particular inmate, they made it too long of the thing they needed to do the job. They had like this huge structure. They call it the wheelhouse. And basically, what they do is they have a horse. They come in on the underside of it, and then there's like the wagon bed behind it. So as they go and do the hanging, they drop the inmate out of the top. He, you know, whatever happens during that. And then when they verify that the execution was successful, they go ahead and remove him and put him on that wagon. And then they take him off for the coroner to do his thing. And then they hand the body off to the next of kin and they have the funeral, etc. That didn't happen in this case. Since the noose was too long, they did what they did. They kicked him out. He bounced off the wagon, off the back of it, and there was such force, he no longer had one of these.
Oh, wow. I was like, I know I've heard that story, but it still shocked me
And
when you said it. I was
yeah,
expecting you to say that the news broke or something.
no, it didn't break. The
Oh
inmate
man.
broke, so to speak. So that was the last straw. The West Virginia state governor got involved and they said, you can't do public executions anymore. Because you can imagine everyone's got their picnic. The kids are there enjoying it, having a good time. They don't know what's going on. The parents see this and it's just absolutely horrific for them. And yeah, that was it. They didn't do that anymore. So then they started doing the only like the victims' families for whatever crime had happened and uh, the next of kin. Those were the only ones that got invited from then on out.
Mhm. I think it's morbid. It just goes to show how even more morbid we used to be back then. Like, oh, let me take Sally, who's only 8 years old, with us to go watch a hanging. That's
Yeah.
absolutely insane to me. Um, and why
When they
would,
told us that during the tour, I was floored. I was like,
oh yeah,
what?
it used to be a really big thing at multiple places. It wasn't just at this penitentiary. It was at a lot of different places. It was the Sunday afternoon thing to do. You got a picnic together, got the whole family together, and you'd go watch all the executions.
Right.
And like, to me, it's mind-boggling that they would have more of an issue of seeing a man decapitated. What is I know it's a little bit more gory, but you're still watching a man die
Right.
with it before, and
And it's a man that you have no connection to and don't even know at that, which to
kind
me,
of,
that's the kicker.
yeah,
It's like I could understand if this individual did something to hurt you or your family or caused you harm or, you know, things of that nature. I could see that. But
mhm,
somebody you don't know and you're just going to show up to watch them die?
yeah, that's just
Like, come on.
that's twisted to me, like, and just that kids were there too, like little kids. That is what freaks me out, I think, the most is
Yeah.
that you were allowing your young children to be witnesses to that kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's insane. But I'm glad that that is not a thing anymore.
Yeah, they
Um,
put a stop to that quick after that. The governor was like, I don't know what you guys did to screw this up, but I'm putting a stop to this now. This is
mhm,
done moving forward. No more
yeah.
public executions.
Just think about like how many more messed up people we created back then by letting them witness that. Like when you see things like
Right?
that as a child, it does stuff to your brain. What?
And you never recover from it. Even with
No,
therapy, you
no,
you just don't.
no.
You're
You
like, I
can
watched a
learn to
man
live
die,
through
and
it, but you don't recover from it,
yeah,
definitely.
and yeah, it's just sad.
Yeah.
But
But it is all part of history. Our history has a
right,
sad, sad tale, and we have a
unfortunately, so
very dark history as well. So,
right. Speaking of history, nothing really like paranormal to this, but it's an interesting history tidbit. Charles Manson.
I am very connected to Charles Manson. One
His
of these
mother was an
days,
inmate at this prison,
I actually remember that.
and
But
he
yes.
tried to come here.
Hmm.
He tried to get moved there, and there's an actually famous letter that you could probably Google, and it's probably everywhere at this point. The warden basically said, in not so many nice words, "You can kiss my. You're not coming to be here with your mother."
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah,
I'm really glad you brought Charles Manson up. One of these days I'll have to do an episode. If you guys want me to do an episode on Charles Manson and talk about
smash that
all
like
my
button.
weird connections, let me know in the comments because I have a really weird connection to Charles Manson. Spiritually, I'm not related to him. Never met anybody who's met him, but spiritually, there's some weird things.
And then this prison was actually, they've had some films or shows actually filmed there. On Netflix, there's a show called Manhunter. They actually filmed one of the episodes at this prison. So they kind of messed it up though, because they didn't actually say, West Virginia, because the scene opens up, you can see the front of the prison, and then the letterings across the screen, it says Virginia. It's not in Virginia. It's West Virginia. So they messed up where the prison was. I don't know if that was by design or what. And it's brief. I'd have to look up the movie as well, but Johnny Depp actually filmed a movie at this prison as well. And it was before he was like really famous and well known. But
Is it
he did.
Crybaby?
I don't believe it was Crybaby.
Okay, because
I'd
I'm
have
like
to look it up.
thinking about all the movies that he was in but when he first started, I'm like, one of the main jail ones I can think of is Crybaby.
Yeah, I want to say it was one of the movies, maybe one or two movies before he like really made it big and became really, really famous. So I'd have to look it up, but they did film it here. And they actually take you through the part of the area where they filmed the most. And as you come into the prison block section, there's this giant spinning metal wheel. Think of it as kind of like a turnstile, so to speak, where the inmates, when they would come into prison, that's how they would bring them in, and then they process them in through booking, and then as they were being booked out, they would go out through the other side of it. And they filmed a scene with that. So I don't know, I'll have to look it up and then let you know what it is.
That's pretty cool. If I figure that out before this airs, I'll add it in somewhere.
Yeah. You could probably pull it up on like Wikipedia and it'd be in there, I would imagine. So then at the end of the tour, basically they take you through like all the cell blocks and stuff. They give you an opportunity to actually be locked down into a cell block if you wanted to. It's kind of cool to hear like some of the cell blocks still work. So they would put you in there. And then at the end of the tour, they actually take you down into the gift shop, which is where that Prisoner University newspaper clipping that you showed earlier was.
Mm-hmm.
And then they actually have a binder like this big filled with like pictures of like photos of ghosts. And
so cool.
we can use that as a segue into that photo that we mentioned earlier.
Well, I actually did save one of the cell block photos.
Yeah, so this is what your
pulled
cell
up right
block
here.
would look like. Initially, you would have a bed or a mattress there. They wouldn't just have you sleep on that metal latticing, so they at least did have some sort of rules in place for you to be able to sleep on your bed. But these are definitely not standard issue cell blocks anymore. Cell blocks are a lot larger than this.
Yeah. Well, and I had also heard that they used to actually cram like 3 to 4 people in each cell block.
Yes, they would.
So imagine being in there with 3 other people, sleeping next to that toilet while someone in the middle of the night's using it. Like that's
Yeah.
part of the conditions on
And
why the riot happened.
And what's even worse is that bed, that's the only bed that's in these cell blocks. They didn't have a bunk system. That was only one bed. So you had 2 inmates, if they were in there 3 deep, sleeping on a cold concrete floor.
And there's even more to this, like thinking about the conditions that they were living in with no air conditioning during the summer and no heater during the winter. Like, could you imagine having to use that toilet in the middle of winter or in the middle of summer? Like, especially the winter, that thing would be ice cold.
Oh, yeah. Terrible, terrible conditions.
So leading into our next photo, how would you like to start?
So, the famous photo that I was referring to earlier is known as the Shadow Man photo. So this photo was taken by a woman. Her name escapes me right now, but we could probably pull it up, see who took it. She had taken a tour, and I want to say this was probably late 90s, maybe even before that. I don't really know when it was taken, but that doorway that shadow figure is actually standing in is the entrance to the kitchen. So they believe they have actually identified the figure that is actually in this photo. He was an inmate, and according to what they would tell us on the tour, this individual loved to eat. He was always hanging around the kitchen whenever they weren't in their cell. So anytime he had a chance to be either in or near that kitchen, he was taking that opportunity. So this individual that took this photo, she's walking down this hallway, and what this photo doesn't really show is how large this hallway really is. So this this hallway is absolutely massive. It goes for probably 300 to 400 feet in length when you come into it, and it is kind of like a couple minute walk to get from one edge of that hallway to where that door is at. So she is probably maybe a good 150 yards from that door when she took this photo. She just felt like something was there watching her, and she couldn't get over this feeling that something was there. So she turned around, had her camera, snapped the photo. There was nothing there when she took the photo. She gets it home. She, uh, processes the photo. She processes the film negative because this was on like 35 millimeter film.
Mhm.
So we're talking like the old school, like little black tubes with like the negatives that you would
Yeah.
take, and then they would make your photos from that. She goes and processes the photo, and when it comes out, this figure is there. And it just spooked the absolute hell out of her.
Yeah, that would
And
be too.
and then she contacted the prison and said, "Hey, I don't know if you know this, but I think your guys' place is haunted." And they're like, "Oh yeah, we know. We know. We haven't had any evidence to prove so until your photo, but yeah, we know it's haunted. We've heard stories." And like I wish I had taken a picture of the photo when I was in the gift house, but they have like all these pictures in a binder, including this picture. And
Mhm.
then like the shirt I'm actually wearing right now is that photo. On the back side of this shirt is that photo, and they sell this shirt in their gift shop in like different colors. So if you're ever there, snag you one of these shirts.
Yeah, if
So
I ever go there, I definitely want one of those shirts. That is
yeah,
a really famous picture, and when I go through and edit this, I'm gonna blow it up a little bit more, but you can see like little things on like the
yeah.
spirit shirt,
So
like it was
he's
his
got,
name tags.
yeah. And it's like they I've only heard that like if you see an apparition is what they call these, like the stronger the energy with that apparition is, the more features you're going to be able to make out.
Mhm.
Like usually they shroud their face unless they really want you to see them. But sometimes you'll see like in this case the prison jumpsuit. Like you
Mhm.
can see the markings of where the inmate's like prison number was or their name, and like now they just silk screen that on is what they
Mhm.
do. But back then they actually sewed patches onto the prison jumpsuits.
Yeah.
So that just tells you how long ago this individual was in prison, and he more than likely died there. I mean, he was probably one of the inmates that they executed, or maybe he just died of old age because some people just died of old age before their sentencing ever came, or they were there for life without prison or life without parole.
Or all
So,
those people who froze to death because they didn't fix the windows.
right, exactly. Then, like, we'll leave you with this. Basically, the gift shop photo with that binder I was telling you that's like this big.
Mhm.
Every single one of those photos is like either like orbs or apparitions, and they were taken by people that have visited the prison, and then they sent those photos to the prison to show off as part of the tour. And one of the photos just blew my mind. So remember how I was telling you um, how the guards would walk around the wall out in the yard and they would be watching the inmates?
Mhm.
One of these photos, you can clearly see that it is one of the guards still on duty walking the wall. And you can see the clear apparition of him, and you can even see his shotgun being held. And it's
That,
that clear and pristine. And they've got that photo in the gift shop. And I was like, wow.
that is impressive to me. I would really love to see that. You make me very excited to go see this penitentiary. Um, but like the guard photo, that just reminds me, like, is it a, what do they call them? Like repetition spirit, like it's a memory, so it's just on repeat? Or did that guard die there maybe
He
during
died
the
there.
riot and he's still overlooking the grounds?
He didn't die during the riot, but he did. I guess at one point there was um, a breakout during when they were in the yard, and the inmates had a hold of something and they threw it up at him. And they placed his throw so well that it actually hit this particular guard and he fell to his death.
Oh, that's crazy. Very
So,
interesting. Thank you
because I
so
even
much for
had like
sharing that.
the interesting thing about the tour guides, some of them are actually ex inmates that stayed at this facility and they take you on tours of it. So the
Wow.
stories that they are telling you, they're not made up, they're not fabricated, they witnessed them themselves.
That is absolutely fascinating. I love that fact. I didn't know
So
that.
I think it's I know you watch it, the Ghost Hunter show with Zach Bagans.
Uh, I watched
The
some of
older
his stuff.
episodes, not the new ones, like after they got caught like faking their investigations and things of that
Definitely
nature.
grew up watching him, so yes.
So one of their early episodes, they actually did go here and do an investigation. And I want to say that one of the guys they interview, he's like this big old burly guy with like a thick biker mustache in the episode. He was an ex-inmate of this prison, and he's the one that walked them through in the daytime before they locked him in there for their investigation.
That is pretty cool. That's like firsthand, like, not only are you going to be talking to the ghosts and the spirits later on, but you just had a tour for someone who experienced it in their real life. That's,
Yep.
I don't know the word for it right now, but it's more than crazy.
Yeah. And then what's even crazier is this prison. It like I really hope in your lifetime you get to go experience this, because the first thing that you're going to notice when you go up to it and you put it in like your GPS maps and it tells you where to go, you're driving through this freaking like fancy little old school freaking like colonial style neighborhood where people actually still live today. And then there's this massive medieval looking structure that looks menacing, and it used to be a prison. And people lived across the street from this prison.
Well, yeah, when they went and watched the executions, they just had to walk across the street. That was perfect living.
Yeah. And it's like that was the thing that blew my mind. It's like they put a prison this close to living areas. Like they don't do that now.
Well, I don't know how old the prison is out here, but the ABC bomber was actually at the prison out here in Littleton, Colorado. And this prison is literally like right in the middle of Lakewood. Like there's a Walmart 5-minute walking distance from it. There's
Oh yeah.
apartments, there's schools, like all of this stuff right next to a prison. And there's actually a school bus storage right next door.
Wow.
And I remember like about 15-ish years ago, there were people walking around with petitions to get the either get the school bus place moved or to get the prison moved, because they were like, what if an inmate breaks out of prison, goes across the street and steals a school bus and goes kidnaps a bunch of kids? Like, let's think about
Yeah, or
this.
worse.
Or hides in the school bus and, whatever. But it just, I remember them being very upset about it.
I don't know why, but when you brought that whole thing up, I think of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where Freddy's driving the school bus.
Oh, those are some good movies. I grew up on those too.
But yeah, that's pretty much my experiences there. I mean, I do have some other stories, but I would pretty much have to, like, if you ever started up a Patreon, we could like pre-record all those, and then you could put them up on there and be like, you want to hear the really nitty-gritty stuff?
Really nitty-gritty.
Like, sign to my Patreon.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that. I do have a Patreon, actually. I just haven't uploaded anything to it in a couple of years. It's kind of, they have like a difficult process. You have to upload your video through several different sources to even get it onto Patreon. It's very odd. Um, but yeah, I think that's something I'll look more into again. And when I get it set up, we'll talk more about the nitty gritty stories of this experience and the other
Yeah,
experiences.
and then we can like show all the other photos and things of that nature, because I sent her other photos. Like in the gift shop, they actually have like things hanging up on the wall of like all the homemade artifacts that the inmates would make, and there were certain tools that the inmates would try to use to try to escape the prison, and they're really elaborate. Like, they look really archaic, but when you're in that situation, you don't care what it looks like, you just want it to work.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing this with us. I don't know about the viewers, but I'm very excited to get my butt that direction so I could go take a tour of this place. I've always been a little nervous to visit penitentiaries and asylums just because I am a sensitive, I am a medium. I can feel those and see them a lot. So I've always been a little bit afraid, especially to go to an asylum. It's so massively
Right,
big and full of trauma that I'm not sure if I could handle it. I might end up in a ball of anxiety there. But
right.
the penitentiaries seem a little different than asylums. I definitely want to check this out.
Right. I would definitely recommend anybody do it. If you don't have the means of going there to see it, it's in Moundsville, West Virginia. It's like up in the western part. Like, it's got that key hook that's right up here, and it connects to Pennsylvania at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ever do like go in there, you fly into Pittsburgh, rent a car, and it's literally like maybe 3.5 hours south of Pittsburgh. But
Good
you'll see
point.
some really beautiful scenery going through there, and you'll get to experience what I like to call the country roads of West Virginia. So basically, what those are is like windy turns going around hills and mountainsides. But
Mm-hmm.
if if you love your scenery and you love seeing all that, I would fully recommend you go in probably mid spring to early summer. I wouldn't recommend going in the winter because those mountains get pretty treacherous with all the snow and stuff. And then springtime, you got all that snow melting off, so you got to contend with possible floodwaters.
Mm-hmm.
So middle of spring, early summer, that would be when I'd recommend you go if you ever do make a trip out there.
Wonderful.
And I can say that because I was actually born in West Virginia.
You're like, I know from experience. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate you. If you ever want to be
Appreciate
back
you
on
as
the
well.
show,
Thank you
let
for
me
having
know.
me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Till next time. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into Let's Talk Ghosts with Sunray. I hope you appreciated it and love this story. If you did like it, go drop me a like, subscribe to the channel, drop me some ghost emojis, and all that fun jazz. Till next time, keep it creepy. Bye.